but I'm not going to have any video today, which is going to be a problem for the survey, but whatever. So,
Julia, this is
yeah.
Maureen. If I can assist in any way, if you want to send me the survey and I can screen share it.
Well, no, that it's going to be shared from headquarters, but
Okay.
but I'm not going to be able to see results or anything.
Okay.
So if you can lead that part of the discussion, that's probably a good idea. I'm very sorry. I don't know. I haven't had quite this problem before. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Are we okay to start? It's open and all that.
Yes, we are all set. We're streaming on YouTube. We're recording and we are ready to get started, Julia. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon and welcome to the Science and Engineering Policy Committee meeting. I'd like to start by taking roll of the committee members. Suresh Babu.
Present.
Artie Bienenstock.
Here.
Maureen Kondik.
Present.
Aaron Dominguez. Not expecting him. Kent Fox.
Here.
Thank you. Suresh Garamella.
Here.
Mel Huff. Not expecting him. Steve Leaf. Not expecting him. Emilia Moran. And Scott Stanley.
I'm here.
Thank you. Do we have any other board members on the online today?
Yeah, Dan Reed is here.
Oh, great. Thank you, Dan.
And
anyone else?
Matt Malkin is here.
Excellent. Anyone else? Great. Nice to have a popular committee. As a reminder, our call today is an open meeting, and we are joined by NSF attendees as well as the public. Our board office liaisons are Reba Bandapadai, Portia Flowers, and Amanda Vernon. Our executive secretaries are Carol Robbins, Ann Emig, and May Aiden, and we are also assisted by two AAAS fellows, Alexandra Serchel and Daniel Elkert. Since our December board meeting, our committee has been very busy with the release and rollout of the Indicators Summary Report, the State of U.S. Science and Engineering, as well as our accompanying policy brief entitled The U.S. is a Keystone of Global Science and Engineering. We've also continued to review and approve the final drafts of additional thematic reports, which will be published over the next few months. In a few minutes, Amy Burke will provide us with an update on the status and publication timing for the remaining reports. I'd like to start out by discussing our financial considerations for doctoral students one-pager. As a reminder, as I'm sure you all remember, this one-pager came out of the Nurturing Talent Group's focus on removing barriers to STEM participation for the missing millions, which was highlighted in our Vision 2030 document. This piece does speak to a key theme in that vision, and it is consistent with our discussions and actions since the release of that report. It's been a focus of significant effort on the part of multiple committee members for almost 2 years. As we've worked to develop this one-pager, it's become clear that SEP members, as well as board members writ large, have a strong interest in examining the barriers to entry into the S&E enterprise faced by all individuals from low socioeconomic status backgrounds. And based on the feedback of the committee, as well as the entire board on the broader discussion, we've revised the one-pager to more explicitly highlight that low SES students face significant barriers to STEM doctoral education, while also not losing the focus that we had in Vision 2030 on the missing millions. As such, this one-pager, while not primarily focused on socioeconomic status, now serves as a potential launch point for exploring that issue. And we will be taking that up more directly starting later in our meeting today. I'm also going to remind you that we've always seen this piece as the first part of a multi-step process to call attention to financial barriers to many who might want to pursue a STEM career. We have always envisioned that there would be additional steps along the way, different and expanded messages as well as work to address different sets of key stakeholders. In this context, I think it's really imperative that we keep this one-pager moving along, finishing the design and putting it forward for a vote of the full board. It is my hope that we will simultaneously start working on exploring the barriers faced by low SES individuals, beginning with our discussion in a few minutes. A lot of time, of course, as you know, has elapsed since the beginning of this project, and while I appreciate the evolution of the board's thinking, I don't believe that we need to get, I do believe that we need to get this one-pager completed before we move on. With all that as a prelude, let me thank you all for voting on the revised version. The voting period closed, and the final vote tally was 9 votes from the SEP committee. 8 voted in favor, 1 was opposed, and so the one-pager has been approved by the committee. The financial considerations one-pager has now been sent to our media contractors, and they are finalizing the figures and overall design. We will take into account several comments that were raised during the voting process, such as the data layout and the color scheme. And once we have the fully designed version, it will be submitted to the full board for a vote, hopefully by the February meeting, so coming right up. We are excited to be rounding the corner on this important policy piece, noting that the Nurturing Talent Group has been working on this for a very long time and working very hard on it. I personally am very pleased with the way it came together. I'm pleased with the level of interest of the entire board, the committee and the entire board in this topic. And I anticipate that, as I said, this is the first of multiple products and a long-standing conversation that we will have on the topic of financial barriers writ large as to entry into a STEM education. So, any discussion on that before we move on? Okay, we have one set of minutes to approve. That is from the November Open Telecon, in which we discussed the anticipated January rollout of the indicator summary report, a draft of the board's product, The U.S. is a Keystone of Global Science and Engineering, and a draft of the financial barriers one-pager. Are there any comments or corrections to these minutes? Hearing no corrections, these minutes stand approved as presented. Since we met in November, the committee and the board have now released the State of Science, U.S. Science and Engineering, commonly referred to as the summary report. That statutory delivery of the summary report occurred on January 18th, along with a diverse outreach to key stakeholders. We will be discussing that rollout in more detail in a little bit. Our committee has also been very busy reviewing thematic reports. In December, the board voted to approve the Invention, Knowledge Transfer, and Innovation Report. The board also voted to approve the Production and Trade of Knowledge and Technology-Intensive Industries Report this week. Please be on the lookout for the remaining thematic reports for your review and approval. Your timely approvals are, of course, critical to ensure that we stay on track for the remainder of the planned releases through May as we complete the 2022 cycle of indicators. It gets really hard to keep the momentum going at this stage of the game, but we've just got to dig in and get it done. Now I'm going to turn the floor over to Amy Burke, the Director of the Science and Engineering Indicators Program in NCSES, and she will give us a few key updates to the 2022 indicators reports. Amy?
Thank you, Julia. Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, we've had a very productive 2022 indicators report cycle so far with the release of the elementary and secondary STEM education, STEM labor force, academic R&D and publications output, thematic reports, and of course, our congressional deliverable, the State of U.S. Science and Engineering. My update today will focus on the informative thematic reports that will be released between February and May to complete our 2022 indicator cycle. This is one of the positive impacts of reimagining, the continuation of engagement with our broad stakeholder community over time through the release of many reports rather than one large one in January. The Higher Education and Science and Engineering report will be released near the end of this month. This report covers a myriad of topics, including S&E enrollment and degree awards in higher education, among others. This cycle, the report also includes data on certifications awards in selected fields and of S&E technologies. In early March, the Invention, Knowledge Transfer, and Innovation report will be released. New to this release, a model of innovation is presented as a framework for readers as they move through the report's in-depth data on patents, venture capital, and other relevant indicators included in this report. In April, we will release the Thematic Reports, Production and Trade of Knowledge and Technology Intensive Industries, also known as our KTI report, and then our Research and Development, U.S. Trends and International Comparisons report, also known as R&D. As Julia mentioned, the board just voted to release the KTI report, and you can expect a board vote on the release of the R&D report over the next several weeks. The KTI report contains our classic indicators on production output, but introduces new data on foreign value-added content of exports as an indicator of industry's reliance on foreign intermediate inputs. The R&D report provides comprehensive data on U.S. R&D and R&D investments globally, including micro-business R&D analysis for the first time, and we have even more information on business R&D by type of R&D, as many have requested over the last several years. The final report to be released in May is our Science and Technology Public Perceptions, Awareness, and Information Sources Thematic Report, formerly referred to briefly as Public Attitudes. This report provides insight into public confidence in and knowledge of many topics in science and technology. This report will also be coming to you for a board vote to release in the coming weeks. In summary, we have 5 thematic reports that will be released in the next 4 months. 3 have been voted on to be released by the board, and 2 still require a board vote to release. The first 3 reports to be released are the Higher Education and S&E report later this month, the Innovation report in March, and the KTI report in April. The R&D and Public Perceptions reports will be released in April and May, respectively. The R&D and Public Perceptions reports will be submitted to the board for a vote to approve their release in the next several weeks. So this concludes the update on indicators. Again, we thank the SEP committee, all the reviewers, and the board for collaborating with us to produce another cycle of high-quality, data-rich reports on the state of U.S. science and engineering. We look forward to receiving your votes in the coming weeks for these final reports and updating you on the releases that are coming over the next several months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. Are there any questions for Amy? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the 2022 Science and Engineering Indicators Rollout. Let me start by saying, as happens every year, it was a Herculean effort by many, many people. I'd like particularly to acknowledge the tireless efforts of the indicators authors, Amy Burke, the program director for indicators, Imelda Rivers, who's the director of NCSES, and Skip Lapia, the former assistant director for social, behavioral, and economic scientists. Also, I'd like to thank our board chair, Ellen Ochoa, who participated in the initial rollout briefings, and there were multiple ones of them that we'll be discussing today. And finally, I, of course, need to recognize the hard work of the entire board office staff. Everyone contributed to making sure that the rollout of Indicators 2022 went smoothly and was a big success, ranging from organizing and managing numerous briefings to the delivery of indicators to the White House and all 535 members of Congress, as well as arranging for various interviews and other sort of extracurricular activities associated with the rollout. I'd also like to especially to thank our SEP Executive Secretaries, May Aden, Ann Emig, and Carol Robbins for all of their contributions to the rollout in numerous ways. Romina Massa, Crystal Coleman, and Garina Isasi with NCSES, who helped with social media and overall communications, working with NSBO's Brandon Powell and Nadine Lim, who led our engagement with reporters. And of course, the outstanding above and beyond work of Reba Bandapadai, Amanda Vernon, and Portia Flowers in working with Ellen and me in developing our presentation and helping it go so smoothly. And I have to say, with some of these briefings, having all of the NCSES staff in the background online and able to address questions in the chat was tremendously valuable as well. Our initial rollout activities were distributed across several weeks. We held 4 virtual briefings, one for the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, which included Deputy Director for Policy Kei Kozumi, along with other OSTP and OMB staff. We had a pre-release briefing for the media, a bipartisan bicameral briefing for Senate Commerce and House Science Committee staff, and a widely attended public webinar for other members of the science and engineering community, which had over 500 attendees from across the country and with diverse affiliations. Now that we've seen such an enthusiastic response from the public, we plan to keep a virtual public briefing in future indicators rollout activities to supplement our typical in-person activities. And I think it goes without saying that all of these activities that we have engaged in this cycle have been virtual. Since the initial rollout, we have briefed at their request the State Department. That happened just yesterday. The National Institute of Standards and Technologies has reached out, and a staff briefing has been arranged for March. And in the coming weeks, we plan to reach out to the Department of Energy and the Congressional Research Service to arrange briefings for later this spring. I'll also add that I'm doing a couple of briefings within the National Academies in March as well. The thoughtful work that went into developing and refining our board messages, building off our Vision 2030 report, was highlighted in the brief. The U.S. is a keystone of global science and engineering. Its messages really seem to resonate broadly, some of including at the public briefing. Several OSTP staff shared that the concept of the U.S. as a keystone is a valuable framing for the varied science policy priorities as scientific research becomes increasingly global. Other areas that garnered special interest and I'd say resonance at the public briefing included the expanded definition of the STEM workforce, which now includes the skilled technical workforce. That was very well received. The K through 12 STEM education, and particularly support for teacher training and concern around the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the STEM educator workforce and student outcomes. The missing millions, especially as it relates to workforce development, higher education, career advancement, and inclusive learning and workplace environments to maintain the STEM talent we need to achieve our vision for the U.S. S&E enterprise. And we did broaden that in our general comments to include low SES students more broadly. Lastly, I want to let you know that we have updated all of the board's 50 state one-pagers with the most recent indicators state data. You'll recall we first created those one-pagers in 2018, and congressional staff, the science and higher education communities, reporters, and NSF all find them a very useful resource, and they were very useful in the various interviews that I did. In fact, given the demand for this state-level information, the board office and NCSES are planning to co-host an informational webinar for the state indicators in April to spotlight the availability of tools and resources around state data. Please be on the lookout for this upcoming webinar opportunity. An overview of media engagement around indicators will be provided by Nadine Lim, who is the board's communications director, during the External Engagement Committee meeting next week. At that time, Nadine will provide highlights of the briefings and media coverage, including interviews with a number of board members. Thanks to all of you who have made yourselves available for participating in media engagement opportunities. In the meantime, Are there any questions about any aspects of our rollout activities and the stakeholder briefings? Okay, I don't see anything. Now, the temptation is when you finally get to the end of this 2-year slog to get indicators out, you just want to kind of fall in a heap and take a deep breath and maybe sleep for a while. But it's time, it's almost before you know it, it's time to plunge into the next cycle of indicators. And we need to review the lessons we've learned from this cycle and consider potential process changes to implement for the 2024 cycle. We will be holding a dedicated SEP meeting on this topic in March. So please be on the lookout for a scheduling poll and further information that will be coming out soon. As I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, we are eager to discuss growing SEP and board interest in exploring issues of socioeconomic status as they relate to broadening participation in STEM. To facilitate a broad-ranging and generative conversation today, we're going to turn to the strategy tool that the board has used in the past when brainstorming valuable points of entry for diverse topics relevant to our work. In your committee books, you have a graphic illustrating the 4 categories of questions we'll go through one by one. What, why, who, and way of engaging on a given priority. In this case, what we should do to address issues related to socioeconomic status. So we first met this at the retreat, and so we're actually going to put it into practice today. But before we get there, I'd like first to turn to Artie for his perspective on how the board should consider engaging on this topic. As you all know, Artie has been particularly actively engaged on this question for some time, including through his efforts on the Nurturing Talent team. So Artie, I'm turning the floor over to you.
Okay, let me share my slides on my screen. Whoops. Can I find it? There we go. Whoops. Okay. There are several reasons why I think we should proceed. Let me point out first that the nation needs a strong STEM workforce for the economy, for national security, for health, and for a variety of other things. Thus, what we are considering today is important for all Americans, not just for those whose participation we want to increase. In some very important fields, a large portion of the graduate students were born in China, and there are good reasons to believe that that flow of students who have been so valuable is likely to decrease. That means that the US must expand other sources of its STEM workforce. Those include domestic, which is our primary concern today, but also it has to look for other nations that haven't traditionally supplied graduate students and STEM workers to our economy. The National Science Foundation programs are vital for expanding the domestic supply, but financial barriers tend to undermine those educational efforts. This slide summarizes some of what I want you to pay attention to. First of all, look at undergraduate debt. What you see here is that for all racial and ethnic groups, undergraduate debt of those who obtained doctorates in 2020 was far lower than the average for each of these groups. That is those who obtain doctorates in STEM fields enter graduate school with much lower debt than the average that our American citizens face when they graduate from college. The second thing I want you to see is the enormous debt that these students acquire while they are graduate students in STEM fields. Note that it's lowest for Asian Americans who have the most capability on average to provide financial support from their families, somewhat more for white, and so on. That is, it shows it's consistent with the concept that the more a family can help, the less graduate debt students acquire. But the clear thing I want you to see is we are not providing enough support for our graduate students. And that means that those who don't have other resources tend to avoid these fields. So what are my recommendations? I think that the NSB should consider the following. First of all, recommending to the National Science Foundation significant increases in the graduate and postdoctoral fellowship stipends. Also, recommending to NSF that a floor be placed on research assistant and postdoc stipends for those supported by NSF research grants. And those stipends should be increased as funding allows, and also as the consumer price index increases. When you see this recommendation, you realize that we really need more information on the demographics of those students and those postdocs. I hope the NSF can and will provide that. We should recommend in our advisory capacity to OSTP that the National Science and Technology Council consider these issues more broadly, since other agencies play important roles in helping to educate the STEM workforce. And finally, that the president and recommend to the president and Congress that Pell Grants be increased so that they cover a high percentage of the average cost of attending a four-year public college, so that most of our undergraduates graduate with minimal debt. Some of these recommendations are included in the one-pager, and I hope that the NSB will approve and circulate that one-pager soon. And with that, I'll quit.
Thank you so much, Artie. Really appreciate your persistence and your ability to articulate the issues, as well as your diligence in at least starting to try to dig up some of the data that we need to tackle this issue, which has proven to be quite a thorny challenge. So thank you for all of that, and I think that it behooves all of us to pay a lot of attention to it and figure out how we are going to respond. Before I move into kind of the survey part of the discussion, are there any questions for Artie? Okay, so we'll bear those things in mind as we go through, as we start going through these four questions. The first question, of course, is what, as in what is the issue? I think Artie's laid that out quite well. Second is why do we want to do it and what's our desired outcome? Third is whom do we need to engage with to reach that outcome? And fourth is way, what activity or product are we going to use to engage? And I would also suggest that is probably the first product, because on all of these things, there's likely to be more than one. The tool, as all of you have seen since we have tried it out on a few kind of test cases, the tool will function like a decision tree. The answers to the first question will inform how we approach possible answers to the second question, and so forth. As we've done in the past, we'll be using an online polling tool for these questions. Staff will put the link to the poll in the Zoom chat now. So you need to have a window available to submit your responses. By bringing the web page for the poll up on your browser on your mobile device. So to get us started, I'm going to ask the board office staff to please share the scenario slide. Oh, whoops, it went away. There it is. Okay. Okay, so I guess somehow we need to figure out how to do two different browser or two different screens going back and forth, I guess. So this is the kind of the background. We want to explore the barriers to STEM participation faced by individuals from low SES backgrounds. Data are problematic. And there's no single widely accepted definition of what low SES is. We've tended to use in K-12 education the qualification for reduced and free school lunches. And so I think the bottom bullet is really important. We need to consider what the board might uniquely contribute, the level and duration of board effort that would require, and how the board would implement it. So the link is in the chat. So let's go there and vote. And
Yes, so as everyone's clicking the link to participate, I will launch the poll. If anyone's having difficulty and needs the link sent over email, please do let us know. But you should see on your screen the first of 4 questions, which, as Julia said, is our what. So what segments of the STEM pathway does NSB want to focus on as it explores barriers to STEM participation? Please choose up to 3 options for our discussion, and note that K-12 is not included in this topic as it's being specifically addressed by the board's working group on K-12 STEM, the KEEG. If anyone's having any issues, please do let us know. The options for the answers are undergraduate education, 2- and 4-year, graduate education, master's and doctoral levels, postdocs and non-faculty researchers, academic faculty, S&E careers broadly, and the skilled technical workforce. So I am seeing results come in, but we'll give this a little bit more time as we wait for everyone to participate. Okay, is there anyone who still needs to vote? Let us know. Okay, hearing none, please return to your Zoom screen and I will share my screen to show the results of the poll. And Julia, please just let me know. I think you may have joined by video as well, but if it would be helpful for me to go through the results and you can't see them, then just let me know. Okay. I can do that.
Actually, yeah, I did manage to get on. So I am looking at them. It'd be hard to do this without it. Okay, so I suppose it's not terribly surprising given that our focus with the missing millions has been on graduate education, that's the one that came out first, with undergraduates and postdocs also getting a significant amount of support from this group. Are there any particular comments on these results?
I would just like to say that I think in prior discussions as well, we really focused on the pipeline problem here. That if we aren't bringing people into STEM fields early enough, then any amount of support or intervention we could do at the level of, say, faculty would have limited impact.
That's right. And of course, that also applies to K-12, but that's being addressed in a different group. So that's why it's off the table at the moment. And you know, Dan also points out very appropriately that you know, fixing the end of the pipeline doesn't help much if you've only got a tiny drip coming out there. The problems are throughout, and the beginning and the middle really matter. You know, so I don't think there's much argument with those results. I mean, that was actually a pretty good consensus on kind of the who part. So any other comments at this point? All right, I think we go on to the next question.
Julia, just one question. Would you like to, for the next question, to be considering all three of those top answers, which means undergraduate, graduate, and postdoc, or would you like to focus in a little bit more?
Oh goodness, this is hard enough without spreading it out across three populations. I mean, they are not disconnected. Actually, graduate is also conveniently in between the other two. So let's focus, and we've been focusing on graduate by this committee. So let's focus on graduate at the moment. You know, I think it's important to remember that we've been talking all along about having a series of conversations, a series of pieces, and potentially a series of audiences about all of these issues. And so let's start with graduate.
Great. So with that in mind, we'll move on to the second question, where you should see now on your screens the why question. What does the board want to do? So here you can choose up to 3 options, from raising awareness of issues and best practices for addressing them, improving data accessibility and availability, motivate action by NSF, influence federal policy as an advocate, and change academic or institutional culture.
Is this back at the same link?
It is.
Okay.
And I'm seeing results come in, but again, we'll give this a bit more time so that everyone has a chance to participate. Great. Is there anyone who's still considering and needs to vote? Okay, if not, then you can return to your Zoom screens. And again, I'll share my screen with the results of the poll.
Okay, nice stair step here. So clearly influencing federal policy came up on top, but also significant effort, significant support for raising awareness and improving data accessibility and availability, followed pretty closely by motivating action by NSF. So discussion, I mean, it looks like there really isn't a terribly dominant first choice here.
Well, I think if you combine motivating action by NSF with influencing federal policy, which are closely related, that becomes a very big focus in the mindset of the voters.
Right, there you go. Yeah, well, at some levels, NSF action is a subset of the other. So that's an excellent point. That is really important. I mean, the other thing that I keep coming back to is if you don't have the data, you don't know where you are today, and you can't tell if you're making any progress. So, Artie.
Let me say that the reason why I focused on graduate and postdoc education is that the NSF effect there is direct. That is, and the board's responsibility is direct. In the other issues, it's more diffuse. And that's my reason for focusing there. Not that I think it's the most important, but that it's most directly connected to our responsibilities.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. What has been pretty interesting with the missing millions thing piece that we've been working on was we started out with addressing NSF, and we got redirected to trying to address that more broadly. And clearly, once we get this thing out, we have to figure out what we're going to do about that. But I think that you really can't think about one without thinking about the other. And which is first is perhaps an issue for debate, but we need not necessarily decide that today. Suresh G.
Yeah, I thought, Julia, that the first three items that were ranked up are all really quite related. If we want to raise awareness, we do it by raising data or having better access to data. And that goes along with influencing policy. So I think the first three are effectively, I mean, I know there are different parts to it, but really quite related. And then if NSF wants to follow the guidance or the, I guess, exhortation we're providing the federal government, then they're certainly welcome to do that. So it seems to me like the first three are really quite combined, and then NSF can follow that that recommendation, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts at this point? Artie, is your hand still up, or are you done for now?
No, my hand. I'll take my hand down.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I think both Artie and Suresh have made pretty compelling arguments that these are really more like looking at different facets of the same gem rather than completely different things. And so it may muddy the waters, but maybe we need to muddy the waters before we start getting some clarification. So, okay. So there's a comment in the chat. This multimedia stuff is getting to me. Okay. Yeah. So yes, and Dan says, yes, action begins at home. NSF should try to lead. I think that's the one that's being referred to. Anyway, so let's try to hold all of those thoughts in our heads. So it's the motivating federal policy makers, of which NSF is a subset, the data, and then communication and messaging are the three things. And now we're moving on to the next stage, which is, I'm not real conversant in this yet. It's the what, is that right? Do I have that right?
For a third
what are we
one,
supposed to do?
I believe you should see on your screen the who question asking, given these focus areas and desired outcomes, with whom should the board engage?
This is the whom. Okay. Got it.
Great.
Okay.
And then here you can all choose up to 3 options from Congress, the White House, including OSTP, PCAST, and OMB, NSF, academic institutions and leaders, state governments, and other federal agencies such as NIH, DoD, and Department of Education.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So vote early, but not often.
Great, and we have everyone participating. So you can return to your Zoom screen for me to show results.
Ah, there we go. Okay. Okay, so we have 3 leaders with some separation, and not surprising, I think, given the results from the past, from the earlier question. The White House, so the executive branch, Congress, and NSF are the top 3, with other federal agencies being the next one. Is there any particular discussion on this? Suresh B.
Julia, I still believe that probably Congress and White House is probably one block there. And then the state governments also plays a big role, because at the end of the day, STEM education, I think, leans back into the state government support also. And that's somewhere, I don't know what our board members think about it. Okay. I'll stop.
At the graduate level, how much state support is there for stipends?
I believe there are mechanisms state government allows that. I don't have a data with me, but probably NSF can play a role in telling what the data is.
Okay, that could be investigated, I suppose. I'm not aware of it myself, but
there are universities.
I would.
Sorry, Julie.
Yeah.
There are universities do support graduate education within their way also, depending upon the needs also.
Okay. I would suggest that these results suggest an approach somewhat parallel to what we've at least been talking about, and are just on the verge of with the missing millions, which was heading towards the executive branch / Congress and NSF, and kind of doing them to some extent in parallel, although they do take somewhat different handling between the two. And so I think it's appropriate to continue to consider what those two, and then the question is, let's see. Well, Reba, I'm going to bring this just out in the open. You just sent me a chat. What kind of, oh, I see. There's all kinds of chat that's, okay. How do we see White House and Congress lowering financial barriers for grad students? Well, certainly that would have to do with things like, well, Pell Grants at the graduate level. It would be maybe not that, but maybe a minimum stipend might be specified, I suppose. And what kind of actions might they take? And Reba, I'm assuming you were asking what kind of actions might the White House and Congress take, not what actions would we as a board take. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was just trying to put together the answer, the kind of priority in the first question of saying you wanted to focus at the moment on the graduate students, and then thinking about that as the White House and Congress being your top targets in that last one. Yeah. What are the actions that you would be advocating to them for doing? What do you think they could do or should do? I mean, you don't have to say that now, but it's just putting those two things together. Yeah. Right. And sorry, I see Artie's got his hand raised.
First of all, the White House and OSTP convened the National Science and Technology Council, which consists of all agencies involved. They support graduate students. If we're taking the lead at NSF, we can also, through NSTC, influence the stipends of other groups. Second, I see increasing the Pell Grant as critical, and that's Congress. The president has already proposed it, but Congress has not acted. If students graduated with less debt, then more students could participate in graduate studies.
I mean, there are other somewhat indirect things that you could imagine. For example, requiring that the agencies report to, somebody what their stipend levels are. One could, just by having that information, then you could start to have a different kind of conversation than when it's not so obvious, and being held accountable just simply because they have to report. That's a low bar, but it's a start.
So sorry, Julia. Quick comment here. So we've had 3 questions so far, and I think really if you take the first 3 answers in each, it's all quite consistent. We said undergrads, grads, and postdocs. We said influence the White House, Congress, and NSF. So I think if we're talking about putting a white paper together, so it seems to me like if we kept those 3 going, that's a fairly weavable story, if you will.
Yeah. Well, we could certainly start that way, and then it might bifurcate or trifurcate as we go forward. And at the end of the day, I think we want a pretty full narrative. But of course, today's society tends to function in sound bites, and so having the full narrative and then being able to pick the parts of the narrative that are appropriate for the particular audience and the message that you're trying to convey at the time could be very useful. Okay, we are almost out of time. I think there is one more question which has to do with WAY. Amanda, can you take this over?
Yes, that's correct. So the final one should be showing now with our WAY. What activities should NSB or SEP prioritize in the near term, so less than 6 months, with a view to engaging with these actors to make progress? So here we have asking you to choose up to 2, as some of these activities could occur concurrently. So there's researching available data and identifying gaps, developing a set of criteria to define low socioeconomic status for board purposes, developing specific policy recommendations, and developing a 1-pager highlighting existing data and reports to distribute broadly.
And one thing I think is worth emphasizing is this is near term. This is not necessarily the final product. I mean, this is getting the ball rolling on something that could run considerably longer than that.
Great, and we're all set with our responses. So I will share my screen.
Did you get mine? It just barely came in.
I believe so.
Okay. So, broad recognition of the need to identify data that might be available, as well as the gaps. Developing a 1-pager and developing specific policy recommendations. Those are all essentially tied. So, that gives us a lot of food for thought. The possibility, if there are enough data available now, to get a 1-pager out pretty fast, but we need to see what data are available first. There's been some work on that, but probably not enough yet. And I think from those 2, the policy recommendations would have to follow. But if we're efficient, maybe we can get all that done in 6 months. It certainly would be nice. Are there any comments on this? Okay, so I think we all agree that this is something that we really want to dig our teeth into, and I think we are pretty aligned on a general direction, maybe not a lot on the specifics, but it's at least a good start. And actually, all the work that the Nurturing Talent team did on the missing millions and the financial barriers, it was really good groundwork as that group struggled with how to focus in and do something. And so I think we have a really good model to follow there. And so we I think we need to include it as we start thinking about what we're going to do with the next indicator cycle. You've seen a lot of things that this committee has done and that the Vision 2030 report did that showed up in indicators in this cycle. And so this is something that could go into the next cycle. And the lens of socioeconomic status is clearly important, and we need to seek ways to continue to engage on that. You know, in closing, I think, you know, we might end up with, in addition to one-pagers, more full reports going forward. And I think this is likely to be a theme that we will see persisting at least through the next 2 years of the Science Board, and quite possibly for a long time after that. Any other comments or questions before I close this out? You will be hearing a lot more about this, and I'm sure we will be wanting a small group to help try to formulate this. In fact, if there are any volunteers at this minute, I'd be delighted to take them. Otherwise, we'll do an email poll because I realize we're at the end of our time.
Julia, I'm here always to volunteer. I'm ready.
Can always depend on you, Suresh. Thank you. We'll send out an email afterwards asking for volunteers to participate. And even those of us that may or may not be continuing on the board, there is work that can be done for the duration of our terms, and so would welcome the participation of those more senior members as well. So thank you all for a productive meeting. For anyone who has yet to vote on the KTI thematic report, please do be sure to do so before the end of the day today, so your vote can be counted. And all that information you've gotten from Portia already. The next vote coming up soon is on public perceptions thematic report. Maureen and I have already seen it, and you'll be seeing that very soon. And I know there's another one hot on the heels after that. There being no further business before the committee, this meeting is adjourned at 32 minutes after the hour. Thank you. Have a good